All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Friday, everybody. Hope all of you guys had a great week. As promised from last night, we're going to do a mailbag today. I'm actually recording 3 completely separate mailbags. We had like 100 mailbag questions in the YouTube video last night, and so I divided them into 3 segments. Today's mailbag is just going to focus on the Western Conference Finals and fallout from that series for both teams. Some big picture topics about the Mavericks in a vacuum and some stuff about Minnesota heading into their offseason. Tomorrow, the entire mailbag is going to be centered around the NBA Finals, so a lot of Dallas-Boston type of topics, right? And then Sunday morning's mailbag is going to be focused on the NBA at large. So I just kind of took all your guys' mailbags all your mailbag questions from last night and just kind of filtered them into those 3 categories. So Western Conference Finals today, NBA Finals tomorrow, NBA at large on Sunday. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. Don't forget about our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. And then keep dropping mailbag questions in those YouTube comments so we can keep hitting them throughout the rest of the postseason. And last but not least, before we get started, I want to talk to you guys about game time. Try to get out and see an NBA Finals game in person. Obviously, it's fun watching basketball on TV, but nothing compares to the intensity and the stakes of witnessing that level of basketball in person. Not to mention, we have a guy who I think is playing like the best player in the world right now in Luka Doncic, Jason Tatum, making his second appearance in the NBA Finals, Kyrie Irving, Jaylen Brown, Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, Derek White. The stars abound. So get out and see one of these games in person. Game Time has an incredible ticket buying experience. I used them earlier this year to go to a game at McHale Center to watch the University of Arizona men's basketball team. It was a last-minute ticket, got a great deal on it, got a great seat, knew exactly what I was getting myself into. It was just a great experience. I want you guys to check it out. They've got all-in pricing, so you don't have to worry about going to check out and getting surprised by how much you're going to pay. You get a good view of your seat within the app, so there's no surprises in terms of what you're actually paying for, and it's an easy process. You can check out in as few as 2 taps. They have last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. I also like their zone deals where you pick a zone and they will actually choose the seats for you within that section or zone, and you get additional savings from that as well. Take the guesswork out of buying basketball finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code HOOPS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code HOOPS. That's HOOPS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's talk some basketball. So, first mailbag question centering around the end of the Western Conference Finals last night. In which quarter did you start recording this episode? It came out like 5 minutes after the buzzer, in reference to the fact that our instant reaction came out pretty quickly last night. It's funny, I had a conversation with our producers last night, and I started working on the show right at halftime. I knew that game was over. And what's interesting, and there's a specific question about this later on in the mailbag, but they were, a team that had come back from a large deficit before. They were down 20 in the second round series against Denver on the road, and they came back to win that game. But I had the feeling that game was just completely over. I thought Luka had mentally dominated Minnesota, sapped them of their confidence. I thought it was over. And so we just got started working on the pod nice and early. And my wife was very appreciative as we got to have a little nightcap last night. I'm glad you're making the points that you are. People are going to talk about what happened to Minnesota, what happened to their scheme, why they did not perform, etc. But in my opinion, there's only one thing that happened tonight. Greatness by Luka Doncic happened tonight. That's it. Game summary done. The 98 Jazz were a championship caliber team. The 2016 Warriors were a championship team, but they both just lost to greatness, plain and simple. We throw around the title of great way too much in this league, but this is what it actually looks like, and it doesn't happen often. I completely agree. I think that there's a desire, I've noticed this a lot, especially from the analytics community. There's a desire to try to have a very clear answer, like a solution to the problem, which I totally understand. That's the way people like that are wired. And I'm wired like that in a lot of ways too. I before I got into playing basketball in college, I was an engineering student. So I thought very much from a math perspective with things. And that was kind of, that is kind of just the goal of everybody when they're looking at a game. It's like, how can we solve this problem? Where's the Where's the simple and detailed explanation of why this happened? And you guys know, like, I love to get into that sort of thing. And we do when I think it matters. Like, whenever we talk a lot about adjustments, we talk a lot about the tactics that are taking place on the basketball court. But at the end of the day, there are some situations where intangible things can have a greater impact. And yeah, I 100% agree. I saw a lot of Mavericks fans in the comments last night, like, oh, Lively was back, that's why we won. And it's like, I know Lively's super valuable to you guys. I'm not trying to minimize that. But no, that's not why you won last night, and it's not why you lost Game 4. You lost Game 4 because the Timberwolves went into your arena and they outplayed you. And then in Game 6 or 5 in particular, Luka was so aggressive earlier. Luka personally scored on 4 of the first 6 possessions of the game. He had that run towards the end of the first quarter that turned, an 18-18 tie into a 31-18 or something like that, if I remember correctly. That Luka snatched their confidence at the start of that game, and then Minnesota stopped executing. They started kicking the ball all over the floor where they have 9 turnovers in the first half. None of them can make a shot. I literally thought that was the game last night. There was no tactical adjustment. There was no, fancy explanation for what happened other than Luka went into that arena and he destroyed the Minnesota Timberwolves, and they never had any chance to regain their footing. How does Luka know when to effectively rest during an offensive possession every once in a while? I feel like this is never talked about enough, and it is so important to his game management, given he isn't a top-tier athlete. 100% agree. It reminds me a lot of the dynamic he had, that Kyrie had with LeBron James. And there's 2 phases to this. First, shout out to Kyrie Irving, because Kyrie Irving's ability to kind of operate on an island by himself is a very unique trait to him that I think makes him super valuable to these do-everything forwards like Luka, like LeBron James, even like a Nikola Jokic, right? I think Jamal Murray kind of plays that role for Denver as well, right? And to me, what it is like, this is where Luka's ability to shoot the catch and shoot 3, which he really broke out over Game 3 and Game 5 of this series in a big way, but like him being able to just stand on the wing 26, 27 feet from the basket and hit catch and shoot threes, that is an important part of his ability to rest while having Kyrie go to work. Because obviously if you throw extra defenders at him, Kyrie's got to make reads. But the unique thing with Kyrie is he can dribble the ball up the floor against ball pressure. He can use a ball screen or use a guard screen to get a mismatch, and he can go to work on an island, dribble 25 times in a possession, and get a good shot for himself. And it's a unique value for Kyrie. But again, the important piece is you got to be able to play off the ball, and that requires you to be able to knock down catch and shoot jump shots, which Luka has been using a little bit more frequently towards the end of this playoff run. Hey, Jason, love the show. Are Daniel Gafford and Dereck Lively examples of what the future of the center position will look like? Athletic bigs, solid defenders, but with low volume scoring. Love to hear your thoughts. So there's multiple different constructs of NBA offense at this point. And, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Dallas doesn't have complications. They certainly do. We talked about in Game 4, those of you guys who watched the film session, or half of the film session, because YouTube picked us to pieces on that one. It was so annoying. I was so frustrated. I spent like 4 hours on that video. It was like 50 minutes long, and we had to cut almost half of the video out. That was really frustrating for me. But in that video, I think we got I never went back to watch the edited portion, but I think we were able to keep some of the stuff in the second half. And I showed some of the examples of stack pick and roll that Dallas was running, which is basically where you have a shooter underneath the basket, back screen for the roll man as he's coming downhill. And they were doing some damage to Gobert in that respect. So Dallas does run some complications in their offense, but they are more of what I would call a 4-out, 1-in offense. So they're the 2 primary forms of offense that I see around the NBA right now are 4-out, 1-in offense and 5-out offense. And the 4-out, 1-in offense is very simple. It's play finishing and play initiation. So it's like shooter in the corner, he's not moving, he's standing there, he's taking a corner 3. Shooter in the other corner, he's not standing, he's staying there, he's taking a corner 3, or he's driving the closeout, right? Same thing for the guy on the right wing, although that guy's usually a secondary shot creator in case Luka needs to bail out from a possession, right? And then it's the guy comes up and he sets a ball screen and Luka just works in that ball screen, right? Like that to me is like the 4-out type of offense. It's very like guys are set up to finish plays, a vertical spacer. The vertical spacer is your 1-in, right? And then you've got your shooters in the corners and a shooter on the wing, right? Another team who runs a lot of that kind of stuff is like the Atlanta Hawks, for instance. They'll do that with Trae Young, right? So like that's to me the 4-out kind of construct. The 5-out construct is where the big man operates more as a dribble handoff fulcrum out on the perimeter. This is like Domantas Sabonis with the Sacramento Kings. This is Draymond Green with the Golden State Warriors. This is Anthony Davis with the Los Angeles Lakers this year, right? Like this is Nikola Jokic with the Denver Nuggets, right? Like this is much more of an offensive decision-making role for the big man. So like Daniel Gafford and Dereck Lively to me are two very different types of centers. Daniel Gafford to me is a 4-out, 1-in type of center. He's a guy that just wants to set ball screen, or is at his best when he's setting ball screens and rolling hard to the rim. And as we know, he can struggle a little bit dealing with making decisions in the short roll. Dereck Lively can do both. Dereck Lively can operate as a 4-out, 1-in center. He's a good screen and roll big who can vertically space the floor. He also can make decisions in blitz situations where he has to kind of operate as the decision maker in the 4-on-3. But I also think if I picked up Dereck Lively and dropped him onto the Golden State Warriors, I think that he'd be really effective in that 5-out system because his ability to make read and react decisions with the ball in his hands. But those to me are the two very different forms of offensive centers. As far as like the future of the center position, it's all about what your offense is, right? Like there's a case to be made that the Jokic, Sabonis type of group, Nurkic type of group, that is the future of the center position for 5-out offenses, like a really good screener that can knock down the occasional jump shot, that is a decision maker in dribble handoff situations out on the perimeter. So like, I don't think that those guys are the future of the center position. I think they're just an example of what 4-out, 1-in centers look like. And even then, I think that's an oversimplification because I think Dereck Lively could operate in a 5-out system. We're this close to crowning a new NBA champ, and with the action heating up on the court, it's even hotter at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. There's only so many games left, and DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered with same-game parlays, live betting, odds boosts, and so much more. Don't miss out, or you'll have to wait until next NBA season to place your bets. It's super easy for first-timers to get started. Try betting on something simple, like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your squad, and place your first bet. It's that simple. The odds for the NBA Finals are up on DraftKings right now. You can get Boston at minus 220 to win the title. Dallas is at plus 175. New to DraftKings, listen up. New customers can get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500. Just deposit at least $5 and you'll get a bonus bet back equal to your first bet if it doesn't hit. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code HOOPS. That's code HOOPS, HOOPS, for new customers to get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500 if your first bet doesn't hit. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Anthony Edwards is the classic guy everyone falls in love with because of his athleticism. But I agree, I don't know if the decision-making will ever develop to the level of Jokic or Luka Doncic. So I want to have Anthony Edwards' back here for a minute because it's not just the athleticism. Obviously, that's an important part of it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Ant's athleticism isn't appealing to people or that's not part of like kind of the energy that surrounds him around the league. I just think that we're underselling how good he was in this postseason. Again, even after that nightmarish conference final series, he was 28 points per game, 7 rebounds and 7 assists. Okay. 28, 7, and 7. He was 48% from the field, 40% from 3, and 81% from the line. That in true shooting percentage is 60%. So he was literally 28, 7, and 7 on 60% true shooting. That's not just we're buying the hype. That's not just Anthony Edwards is a media darling. That's fucking awesome basketball. That's awesome basketball for 6 weeks against Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker, and against the defending champs with the best player in the world in Nikola Jokic. And while he was inconsistent defensively in this postseason run, a big part of how they won Game 7 was his defense in the second half against Jamal Murray. During the entirety of the Minnesota run in the second half, where they went from down 20 to up 5, he held Jamal Murray scoreless. So again, like obviously we're in love with his athleticism, but there's more to it than that. The dude showed real jump shot making ability. Once again, this is the third straight postseason where his jump shot has been resilient into the throughout the playoffs. He's been a really big personality in his ability to kind of like just be fun to watch on television, to invigorate his teammates and be a leader. Like I think I was annoyed last night because this is something that happens every year, by the way. every year there's like a new team that kind of starts to have some success. Like this year it's Dallas. Last year it was Denver. The year before that it was Golden State. The year before that was Milwaukee. The year before that it's the Lakers, right? And every single year their fan base goes, actually, we're the next great team and everyone else sucks and we're amazing. And then we get to the next year and then something happens, they lose and a new team takes that spot. And in that kind of energy from that fan base, whoever that fan base is, there's this desire to like put everybody else down, right? Like every Denver fan like just had victory laps on the Suns and the Lakers for an entire offseason, right? And then it's like, then they end up losing in the second round this year. Warriors fans, lots of victory laps after the 2022 season, and then the Lakers beat them in 2022, right? Like at the end of the day, like this stuff tends to be fleeting as a result of the fact that the league is very, very deep. There are certain teams that I think are resilient. Like I do think Denver will be back, right? Like I think Dallas in particular is built for some sustained success over the next few years. So I think they'll be back. But like the idea that these teams are just going to rip off 3-4 championships in a row, that's just not how this works. And like for whatever reason, Dallas fans can't just appreciate that they're having success and that they're going to get praise in the media. It has to be, no, but also Anthony Edwards is a bum. And that's just stupid. He averaged 28, 7, and 7 on 60% true shooting at 22 years old in the NBA playoffs. That kid deserves flowers too. As far as Anthony Edwards in the big picture, I pointed this out on Twitter last night, but in LeBron James's age 22 season, the Spurs embarrassed him. He shot like something crazy, like 36% from the field in that series. He shot 20% from three, averaged 6 turnovers a game. He was nightmarishly bad in that Spurs series. And guess what? Now LeBron is like unanimously regarded as at least the second best player of all time, if not the best. So like Anthony Edwards, is he as good as Luka Doncic yet? No. Luka badly outplayed him in this series and clearly demonstrated a gap between the two of them. Specifically, I think one of the things that this playoff run emphasizes is that Anthony Edwards lacks matchup versatility at this point. If he's going against teams without athleticism on the perimeter and rim protection, he's going to demolish you. But as soon as he runs into matchups like that, it gets a little bit more difficult. That's something he's going to have to confront in the future. We're actually going to get to that later on in this show. But don't use this playoff run to bury Anthony Edwards. That's silly. He's going to be back. If you're under the impression that the 22-year-old that averaged 28, 7, and 7 in the conference finals to eliminate the defending champs and that super team Suns team, if you're under the impression that he's not going to be back on this stage, you're fooling yourself. He's going to be back and he's going to be better. And that kid has so much room to grow because of his supreme athletic tools. I do think he's going to be, by the time he's Luka's age, by the time he's in that 25, 26, 27, I think he's going to be on that tier with Jokic, with Luka, with Giannis. He's not there yet, but I think he's going to get there. This is a little context for this question. I ranted at the end of the show last night about how if you look back through NBA history, center like you can't win a championship unless your center is some kind of offensive threat, either a legitimate like catch and finish threat or a perimeter threat, something along those lines. Like the last year, obviously Jokic. The year before that, Draymond Green. He's an offensive fulcrum in the 5-out system for Golden State. Even though he has some limitations, he's a much, much better offensive player than Rudy Gobert. 2021, Brook Lopez. 2022, Anthony Davis, right? Even in their big looks, like Dwight Howard was like a much better catch and finish player around the rim than Rudy Gobert was. 2019, we had Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol, right? Kevin Durant and Draymond Green in the 17-18, Kevin Love in 2016, Tim Duncan in 2014. Like we can go on and on and on. Chris Bosh in 2000 on the Heat teams, Dirk Nowitzki. Although that team with Tyson Chandler was more like Dereck Lively, a much better type of a vertical spacer and decision maker on the roll, right? So like in NBA history, you need a center that has at least some offensive capability to win the title. Mailbag question. The other difference between the Rudy build and the Dallas build is that Dallas can win if Lively is making decisions. They're going to lose if Rudy is getting a lot of offensive touches. Totally agree. Dereck Lively, to me, is a substantially better offensive player than Rudy Gobert. But the other piece of that, too, is like some of his spacing limitations, like Lively not being a shooter, is not a problem because, one, Lively can make those decisions. Two, Lively has great hands and catches and finishes everything around the basket. And then lastly, Luka Doncic is a deeply manipulative passer that can get really high-quality opportunities around the basket. The problem for Rudy is he's not playing with that level of playmaker, and he has stone hands, and he can't make decisions on the roll. It's like the trifecta disaster for trying to score in the half court against an elite defense. Minnesota clearly disintegrated under Luka's barrage of points, but they were also down against Denver by 20 and still found a way to come back. What was different between Minnesota versus Denver Game 7 and this game? And why wasn't Minnesota able to compose themselves like they did against Denver? Love your videos, by the way. Really simple to me. In the Denver series, Anthony Edwards, and this kind of, I was talking with Adam Matters about this last night because he pointed out fairly that Denver actually had a better defensive rating against Minnesota than Dallas did. But some of the data there is a little tricky because that was like two different series. Like Minnesota dominated Denver outside of the middle portion of the series. Like Minnesota in the 4 wins whooped the shit out of Denver, right? And then you look at the middle 3 games in Denver beat the shit out of Minnesota in those 3 games, right? So the data is all wonky. And if you looked at it, Denver had a 116 defensive rating against Minnesota in their losses, but they had a 106 defensive rating in the wins. So like, if you look at it, it's like in those 3 wins in game 3, 4, and 5, Denver locked down Minnesota's offense. That's great, but you got destroyed in the other 4 games. The Dallas series was very different. In every single game of the series, Dallas guarded Minnesota well. They held them, it was like 112 defensive rating in their wins and 113 in the 1 loss. So in terms of like consistently holding down Minnesota's offense, Dallas was way better than Denver. In the 4 losses, Denver just couldn't get stops against Minnesota. Specifically, what stood out to me on film, Anthony Edwards in the Denver series averaged 7.1 attempts in the restricted area per game. In this series against Dallas, he averaged just 5.8 restricted area attempts per game. So that's 1.3 fewer attempts. He also shot 19% worse in the restricted area against Dallas than he did against Denver. He shot 55% in the restricted area against Dallas, 74% against Denver. And so for me, what stood out was every time there was a half-court situation, Anthony Edwards didn't really know what to do against Dallas. Whereas against Denver, he just felt like he could get to his spots more easily at the rim, and that's why Denver had to just start hard doubling all over the place. Now, Dallas also did some doubling against Minnesota as well, but they have more rim protection and athleticism on the back line, which allowed them to rotate out of it better than Denver did. Like they would load up the side against Ant, and then he'd swing, and then all of a sudden Naz Reid would be slashing a closeout, and Denver just didn't have the athleticism to hang on that backside, right? And so like the Denver series, by the way, I'm only talking about one side of the floor. The offensive side was the same. Like in the Denver series, Minnesota held them to something crazy like 106 points per 100 possessions for the entire series, whereas Dallas averaged like 118 points per 100 possessions. So Dallas's offense was way better against Minnesota's defense than Denver's offense was. And so really, in the Denver series, it was like Minnesota actually was capable of slowing down Denver's offense, and they were actually able to score, whereas against Dallas, they couldn't do either. And so that's why, even though there was another large deficit, I just never felt like Minnesota had a shot to come back in that game. My jaw dropped watching Lively at the level of the screen stick with Ant as he tried to string Lively out to attack the rim. He literally had to reset the offense. With his defense in space at 7 feet, his rim protection, and his short roll passing, what are we watching? Some horrifying fusion of Draymond and AD? I wouldn't go that far. I feel like that's a little early and a little bit hyperbolic, but I am really, really excited to see the type of player that Dereck Lively becomes. I imagine him being like a Tyson Chandler 2.0, like an evolutionary vertical spacer that has the ability to run 5 out, to operate more in space, I actually think he's got good touch, so I'm really curious to see over the years if he adds a pick and pop element to his game. Like, I think Dereck Lively can be very, very good, but like you're talking, fusing Draymond and AD is fusing the two best defensive players of this era. I would slow down a little bit on that. I think we need to see him actually anchor a defense for 82 games, playing 32, 34 minutes a night before we start throwing him in those conversations. But that certainly is potential that Dereck Lively has, and I'm really, really excited to see if he can meet that over the course of his career. The issue with the idea of Minnesota moving away from their amazing inside defense and focusing mostly on perimeter defense is that you do not beat Denver in a 7-game series if you value perimeter D more than inside D. And without the double big man setup, you cannot slow down Jokic. The T-Wolves do not beat Denver if they do not have Gobert at the 5. I actually disagree about this. As good as Gobert was in this playoff run on the defensive end of the floor, and I do think his defensive effort in this postseason was underrated based on some of the lowlights of him getting hunted and just some of the narrative stuff surrounding him, I thought the bigger factor in Denver struggling against Minnesota was Naz Reid and Karl-Anthony Towns. And it's because those guys could hold up under the bully ball attack of Jokic because of their bigger frames, right? Like, I actually thought Gobert got mostly fried by Jokic in that series. And then by the end of the series, Jokic kind of had figured out the stunting that Gobert was doing. And that was a big part of how Denver got back into it, because Jokic was just killing them in that middle portion of the series. That, like, obviously it's going to be tougher to beat Denver if you don't have Gobert, but I still think they can, because they'll have a too big look with Naz Reid and Karl-Anthony Towns. And this is in this scenario that I've discussed. If they pivot off of Gobert, they would upgrade that power forward spot to a really high-level offensive player. And let's not forget that during the stretches where Denver dominated in that series, they really slowed down Minnesota's offense. And so, again, I think you can still build a team that can beat Denver without Rudy Gobert. And it doesn't matter if the Gobert lineup can beat Denver, but you get your ass kicked by Dallas because Gobert's stone hands and his inability to make decisions on the roll, then you're not in any sort of better position anyway. It's not about beating Denver to win the title. You got to beat 4 teams to win the title. And so you might have to sacrifice a little bit of your capability to beat Denver to make yourself more versatile to beat the other teams around the league. Hey, Jason, love your show. Such an enjoyment to hear your breakdowns after each playoff game. Helps appreciate the game at a whole new level. Thank you for the kind words. Want to hear your thoughts on the Wolves. People say defense wins championships. However, when I look at the Timberwolves, it seems like they really lack an offensive identity. How could it be fair to expect Cat to play well when he could get benched when Reed plays a bit better one night? Or is defense simply that much more important than knowing how many shots or reps you're going to get each night? For example, Cat having dumb fouls versus getting consistent shots each game. What do you think? So I don't think that specifically has anything to do with it. I think it's just about team construct. So Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, what types of offensive players are they? They are shooters and drivers. That's what they do best, right? Neither of them are elite playmakers. They're capable. Ant just averaged 7 assists in a playoff run. I'm not trying to act like they can't make plays, but they are not Luka Doncic, Chris Paul, Nikola Jokic, LeBron James level playmakers. That's not their game. Those guys, the entirety of their game is predicated on downhill rim pressure and pull-up shooting over the top, right? That's what they're built on. And so you need to build the roster around their skill set. Let's not forget, this team was 17th in offensive rating all season. This team had a 104 offensive rating in crunch time. They were a god-awful crunch time offense. This was a consistent issue all year that 2 favorable matchups against Denver and Phoenix made it look like their offense was better than it actually was. Then they ran into a team with rim protection and got strangled. So the reality is this team has a flawed offensive construct, and they will eventually run into teams. We talked last night about the standings and looking at the different teams with rim protection, and I mentioned OKC, and I mentioned the Lakers, and I mentioned Dallas. Another big team I missed in there is Memphis. Memphis could rejoin the picture next year. They will rejoin the picture next year, and it's going to be a lot of Jaren Jackson and Brandon Clark on that front line, and they have guys that can guard on the perimeter. Like, it's going to be similar challenges if you run into a Memphis. So, like, half of the playoff field next year is going to be elite rim protectors again. And so this is going to be a problem that they have to deal with in the future. And so to me, they have to build a construct in this roster that is less reliant on Cat and Anthony Edwards' ability to pick apart the defense, because it's not just the Rudy piece. Like, Rudy obviously is a problem because he can't catch and finish consistently, but Dallas was throwing a lot of late help at Ant and Cat, meaning like Ant would drive, and then the low man would just bail out of the corner and come over and wall up on Ant, like as he's getting into the lane. So he's not just challenging Gafford or just challenging Lively. He's challenging multiple bodies in there. And Ant is not the kind of player like Luka or like those other playmakers I mentioned who's just going to pick you apart by making those last second reads really effectively. So you have to make things easier on your stars. If you're going to be built around Cat and Anthony Edwards, you have to generate natural spacing so they can have really simple shoot, drive, pass reads. You have to make it very simple for them. That, to me, is the direction that they have to go in terms of their roster construction. As a Wolves fan, I find your argument about Edwards and Gobert's fit very cogent. Something Ant can never seem to figure out is lobs to Rudy. He has shown flashes, but can never put it together when he needs it. I do wonder what 5 would work best for him. Maybe a Gobert for Miles Turner trade. Great analysis as always. Thanks again for the kind words. That's an example. I Gobert and Miles Turner, that trade probably won't ever happen, especially with the dollar amounts. Gobert makes a ton of money, and that's going to make the trade difficult. As I said last night, I actually think Gobert probably ends up staying in Minnesota just by virtue of the realities of the contract. And he's got a player option that he's almost certainly going to accept. So Gobert basically has 2 years left on his current deal, and it's very possible that he's in Minnesota for both of those. But that is the type of swap that would make some sense for me in the sense that Miles Turner is a pick and pop big that would make for easy, because like again, drop coverage like Dallas is running with Gafford and Lively, the perfect counter for that is a pick and pop, because that puts that big in a really tough position where if he drops and Ant just throws simple kickback passes, it's wide open threes all night for Miles Turner. If he doesn't drop and he stays home with the roll man, then with the popping big, then Ant can turn the corner and get in the lane and there's no rim protection in there. So like a shooting center is ideal, but I think their best bet there is to try to flip Rudy to a team that is actually willing to aggregate the salaries if they can and target something more along the lines of a power forward, and I'd have Cat be that shooting big. I really do think that Cat, if you simplify his role as well, because again, he's driving and dealing with the Gobert problem just as much as Ant is. And so for me, like if you could get a Portland to trade you a Jeremy Grant for a Rudy Gobert or something along those lines, if you could, or a 3-team deal that sends Ayton or Gobert to a different destination, if you could do something like that, that to me is where I view the ultimate version of this team is Ant and Cat playing in a spaced floor surrounded by shooting guys that can defend, guys like Jaden McDaniels, guys like Jeremy Grant, if it ends up being Mike Conley or a different player in the future. That to me is the direction I would eventually go. As far as Gobert, though, yeah, like I think he has to play on a team that has an elite playmaker. I think that's the only type of team that he would be able to actually win at the highest levels with. With Dallas advancing to the finals, there's a debate going around on who is the best backcourt in NBA history. Growing watching Golden State when I was in high school, I don't think there's a better backcourt than Steph and Clay. I want to know what rank do you have for them? If there is one better backcourt than them, who would it be? Thank you for your analysis. Been a huge fan of you so far this year and a half that I've been following you on YouTube. Thanks again for the kind words and for the support. This question is frustrating to me because I really don't look at it as like backcourt. To me, it's like perimeter players, interior players. It's really that simple. Like, for instance, Luka functions kind of like a point guard offensively, but on defense, he's not guarding guards like Dereck Jones Jr. is and Kyrie Irving is. And, so like to me, like focusing on who the backcourt is silly. It's like Steph Curry. Like Steph Curry, for the most part, is being hidden defensively as much possibly as he can because he's got such a big offensive role, right? So like to me, it's more like duos. And when you're ranking duos, ranking Luka and Kyrie is a much more complicated topic because you're looking against, hundreds of duos over the course of the last few decades, right? So like that's something that's more of something that we get into in the offseason. But to me, I don't really find the conversation around best backcourt even relevant here because I don't look at Luka as a traditional backcourt player. To me, Luka represents where the game has changed, which is, and your best player has the ball in his hands, Like LeBron James plays power forward for the Lakers, and he ran the point a lot in this postseason run for the Lakers, right? But he's not guarding point guards, right? So like to me, I don't look at them as a backcourt. I just look at them as a star duo, the way I'd look at Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, for instance. Hi, Jason. I agree with your Gobert assessment, but Cat has more trade value. So I think he'll be the one that gets moved and Nas shifts to a starting power forward role. If that happens, where do you think is the best landing spot for Cat? Detroit has the cap space to absorb him as the starting center. They immediately get a go-to scorer and a floor spacer to help Cade and Ivy. Asar can mimic the McDaniels role as well as anyone. New Orleans is another option. The Pels get their center and can space the floor for Zion to attack the rim. And Ingram, McDaniels, Gobert front court has plenty of length. Any other spots that come to mind? All of those make sense to me. Another couple that I looked at, Milwaukee, like Karl-Anthony Towns next to Giannis would be a really interesting type of build. Miami, I think a huge lineup with Bam Adebayo and Karl-Anthony Towns could be interesting. Oklahoma City was another one I thought of. Like, imagine Chet Holmgren as more of the rim protector, basically just putting Cat next to a shooting version of Gobert, and that's the type of situation you can have there. But like, again, I wouldn't trade Karl-Anthony Towns simply because I think Gobert is a much bigger issue. And anytime you start flipping a player like Cat, it's really hard to replace his value, especially considering like in a lot of postseason situations this year, he was one of their more reliable scorers. And I say that as he was still inconsistent, but in terms of guys next to Ant, he was probably the most consistent scorer, certainly was the most consistent scorer of that group. 3 more questions. Dallas is playing out of their minds. Can't miss a shot. Fun to watch. Looks like the Serbian, Slovenian, Balkan brothers of Jokic and Luka will dominate 2 years in a row. But overall, as a very long-term NBA fan, this year's playoffs have been disappointing. I thought this was going to be one of the most competitive playoffs ever, and it's been one blowout after another. Even the Nuggets-Wolves series that went 7 didn't have a single game that was really competitive or interesting. One of the most boring playoff stretches I've ever seen, hoping the Dallas-Boston series will actually be interesting and worth watching. So I'm actually more optimistic about it. I think there's an important piece of context that kind of throws all of this in a mix. Every year in the playoffs, there are competitive matchups and there are bad matchups, right? For instance, like even this Western Conference Finals series, that was 5 games. I thought it was a highly entertaining 5 games because every game was super competitive, right? Whereas like Minnesota-Denver goes 7, but every game's a blowout, right? That's normal in the playoffs. There are series where where the games are blowouts. There are series where every game is close. Like that is typical. The problem is we didn't get as much of the competitive series because because of what happened in the Eastern Conference. And there's 2 things that happened in the Eastern Conference. I thought there were 5 good teams in the East this year. I thought it was Boston, Milwaukee, Indiana, New York, and Philly. Those to me were the good teams. Orlando, Cleveland, Miami without Jimmy Butler after the injury, just not legitimate competitive basketball teams, right? First of all 3 of those teams ended up in Boston's side of the bracket. Problem number 1. Now Boston doesn't even have to play a real team for 4 weeks, right? Second side of it, everyone got hurt. Embiid's playing on a bad knee. The Knicks literally had like 17 different injuries. Tyrese Halliburton falls apart at the end of the Pacers series in the conference finals. What's the one I'm missing? Oh, Milwaukee. Giannis misses the entire series and Dame misses part of it, right? So if that had balanced better, like if 2 of the good teams were on the same side with Boston and the other 2 were on the other side and Boston had to play a real team in the second round and everyone was healthy, I think we would have had more competitive basketball games to kind of balance everything out. But because the East was basically a shit show, the only real good series there was like New York, Philly, right? The Indiana, New York series wasn't very entertaining because they were all blowouts after the first 3 games. But like, that the East being a shit show kind of made it so that we didn't have as much competitive basketball. But I still thought there were a lot of really entertaining games. That Lakers-Nuggets series for a 5-game series, every game was super entertaining and we had 2 buzzer-beating game winners, right? I thought that Dallas versus the Clippers was pretty entertaining. I thought Dallas versus Oklahoma City was a highly entertaining series. Dallas versus Minnesota, because a lot of that has to do with Dallas. We talk so much about Dallas and Luka and Kyrie. Their defense is one of the primary drivers of their success. That's a big part of how all those games are close, right? I thought there were plenty of entertaining basketball games, and also I think Dallas versus Boston is going to be an awesome NBA final. I'm very excited for it. Hi, Jason. Big fan of the show. I know it's a bit irrelevant, but I'm just curious. If Denver had beaten the Minnesota Timberwolves in Game 7 and advanced to the Western Conference Finals, who do you think would have won between Denver and Dallas? I would have picked Denver over Dallas. There are a couple of key specific matchups there that would have skewed towards Denver. First, Dallas's defensive personnel is very much set up to handle a guy like Ant. It's not very set up to handle a guy like Nikola Jokic. Both Gafford and Lively struggle to handle him on an island. They would have been in double teams the entire series. It would have been a problem. And then on the other end of the floor, the problem that Minnesota had is they never had a big, strong enough perimeter defender to handle Luka, and that's literally what Aaron Gordon's specialty is. I've seen him do it against LeBron. I've seen him do it against Jimmy Butler. I've seen him do it against Kevin Durant. Aaron Gordon's one of the best big forward defenders in the league. That would have been a much better matchup for Denver in that series. And so, again, it would have been close. I would have probably picked Denver in 6 or 7 games, but I would have picked Denver. And as you mentioned, it's irrelevant because Denver couldn't beat Minnesota. And that's just how Dallas fans are all super sensitive about this, similar to what I talked about earlier, where it's like the sensitivity surrounding like just needing to trash Anthony Edwards. The other piece of it is like Dallas fans are super sensitive about you saying that they got a good matchup. And it's like, no one ever won a title without getting some good matchups along the way. There is no such thing in this field as the ultimate dominant team. I love this Dallas Mavericks team. They're a bona fide championship contender. I had them 3rd in my contender rankings coming into this postseason run. Makes sense that if Denver lost, they'd be the team that would get in, right? 100% on the Dallas bandwagon. They were a 5 seed. This is not the 73-win Warriors. This is not the KD Steph Warriors. They're not just going to obliterate everyone who comes in front of them. Boston is a minus 220 favorite in the finals, according to DraftKings right now. So, like, again, everybody has to benefit from matchups unless you're one of the all-time great teams in NBA history. And as good as this Dallas team is, they are not one of the all-time great teams in NBA history. And so, again, like, it doesn't matter. Dallas is a deserving NBA finalist, but like, yeah, if I personally would have picked Denver if they made it to the Western Conference Finals, it would have been close, but I would have picked Denver. I don't understand the Gobert hate. My numbers could be a bit fuzzy, but in this playoff run, the Timberwolves allowed 110 points per 100 possessions with him on the court and 133 with him off. Why is this fringe player that is going to come in and essentially make a plus 20 swing? The issue is Ant not being good enough with a mediocre offensive talent on the roster to overcome good defense. If you actually think that Anthony Edwards is a bigger problem for this Timberwolves team than Gobert, I don't know what to tell you. The reality is that you got your ass kicked in the conference finals. So forget about the plus-minus numbers. When Rudy was on the floor, you couldn't beat Dallas. That's the issue. Doesn't matter if you were worse when he was off the floor. The problem isn't whether or not Gobert is the best player to play on this roster. That's not the issue. Of course that's the best option for this roster. With this group of players, you needed to play Gobert to give yourself the best chance. What I'm saying is this is not a championship roster. I said this last night. To me, this Minnesota Timberwolves team is closer to the Lakers from last year than they are to a real championship contender. In the sense that the Lakers got a couple of favorable matchups in the first 2 rounds, right? They faced a downhill threat in Ja Morant in the first round so they could protect the rim, cause a bunch of problems. And then they faced a Golden State Warriors team that has consistently struggled with Anthony Davis over the last few years. They got 2 favorable matchups. They beat the defending champs, and then they ran into a real championship contender and got their ass kicked. That's what happened to Minnesota. They got a really favorable matchup in the first round. They played Phoenix, a pull-up jump shooting team that likes to attack from the perimeter on an island, and they have all the perimeter defenders to match up with those guys. They locked them up. They kicked their ass, right? Then they ran into the defending champs. It was a bad matchup because they have all this perimeter size. They have to throw at Jamal Murray. They have all this interior size to throw at Nikola Jokic. They beat the defending champs. Now, that Denver team is way better than last year's Golden State team. I want to be clear. So I do think that they're better. I think this Minnesota team was better than last year's Lakers. I'm just saying they're closer to that than they are to a real champion. Then they ran into a real championship contender, this Dallas Mavericks team, that actually could attack some of Minnesota's weaknesses, and Minnesota got their ass kicked. So, again, defend Gobert all you want. You're not a championship team. So, you weren't close. You weren't actually close this year. By the way, I said the same thing about the Lakers last year. I didn't come out of that run going, okay, next year it's Denver, Boston, and LA. No, that's not what I said. I said that there's Denver and Boston, and then there's a gap. I think I put Milwaukee in there, but I was like Denver, Milwaukee, Boston, and then there was a gap before we got to the rest of the teams. And I said the Lakers have to make a trade to get better, and I feel exactly the same way. about this Minnesota Timberwolves team. They are going to run into Memphis, the Lakers, Oklahoma City, or Dallas next year in the playoffs and lose again if they have Rudy Gobert on the floor. Because the issue is their offensive players are slashers and pull-up shooters, not high-level playmakers, and they can't handle the fact that teams can really pack the paint when Rudy Gobert's on the floor, and Rudy's not the kind of guy that can easily catch and finish everything to kind of make up for that type of flaw. So again, I think that focusing on on-off numbers from this series is missing the plot. You got your ass kicked. You're not a championship team. So that is the major issue. All right, guys, that is all I have for today's mailbag. I'm going to be back to, again, I'm going to record it right now, but uploading tomorrow morning, we'll have a mailbag focused on the NBA Finals. And then on Sunday morning, we'll have a mailbag focused on the rest of the NBA. I will see you guys then.